There is a voice in your head right now. It is reading these words. It has been there every day of your life. You call it your own. You trust it completely. You make decisions based on what it says. You have never once questioned whether it is really you. But neuroscientists, who study what they call inner speech, have spent decades asking exactly that question. And what they found is strange enough to make you pause mid-thought. First, it helps to understand what the inner voice actually is at a neurological level. When you speak out loud, your brain sends motor signals to your mouth, tongue, and throat. When you speak internally, researchers have found that the same motor regions fire. Your brain is performing something very close to actual speech, but silencing the output before it reaches your voice. Researchers call this subvocalization. Your inner voice is, in a very literal sense, speech that was stopped just before it happened. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. Not everyone has an inner voice. For years, researchers and most people simply assumed that everyone experienced a continuous verbal inner monologue. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Research by psychologist Russell Hurlburt, who developed a method of sampling people's inner experience at random moments, found that inner speech varies enormously between individuals. Some people think almost entirely in words. Others think predominantly in images, feelings, or sensations, with very little verbal narration at all. And many people move fluidly between these modes, depending on the task, the mood, and the moment. This means that the inner voice you experience may be far more variable and constructed than it feels. But the deeper question is not whether you have an inner voice. The deeper question is where it comes from. When you hear your inner voice, it feels like you are generating it. It feels like a deliberate act, like choosing to speak to yourself. But brain imaging research tells a very different story. Studies using neuroimaging have shown that the brain regions associated with inner speech become active slightly before a person reports being aware of their inner voice. The voice appears to be generated before you are consciously aware of it. In other words, the voice arrives, and then you notice it. You are not quite the author. You may be more like the first reader. This connects to a much older and stranger philosophical problem. If you are listening to the voice, who is listening? And if you are the voice, who is the listener? This is not a trick question. It is one of the most genuinely unsolved questions in the science of consciousness. Now consider what the inner voice actually says. It criticizes you. It reassures you. It reminds you of things you would rather forget. It rehearses conversations that never happened. It argues with people who are not in the room. It tells you stories about yourself that may not be accurate. Psychologists studying self-talk have found that the inner voice is often not a neutral narrator. It carries emotional tone, bias, and assumptions that were often formed long before you were old enough to question them. Some researchers have suggested that the inner voice is partly constructed from the voices of other people. Parents, teachers, people who praised you, people who criticized you. The psychologist Lev Vygotsky proposed decades ago that inner speech develops directly from external speech. A child first hears language from others, then begins speaking aloud to themselves, and finally internalizes that speech into the silent inner voice we recognize as thought, which means the voice you call your own began as something borrowed. It was assembled from the words of others before you had any words of your own. This raises a question that is difficult to dismiss once you have heard it. If the voice was built from the language of others, shaped by early experiences you did not choose, and generated before you consciously hear it, in what sense is it yours at all? There is a condition that makes this question feel urgent in a very different way. Some people experience their inner voice as genuinely not their own, not as a metaphor, as a genuine perceptual experience. Auditory verbal hallucinations, experienced by some people with psychosis and by others without any psychiatric diagnosis at all, involve hearing a voice that feels entirely separate from oneself. Neuroscientists have found that these experiences activate the same brain regions as inner speech. The machinery is identical. What differs is whether the brain correctly labels the voice as self-generated, which means the only thing separating your inner voice from a voice that feels like a stranger is a single attribution signal. Your brain is constantly tagging the voice as yours, but that tagging is a process, not a fact. It is the brain deciding, moment by moment, that this voice belongs to you. So what does it actually mean for a voice to be yours? Is it yours because your brain generated it? Is it yours because you hear it? Is it yours because you agree with it? Or does the voice become yours only when you choose to believe it? These are not questions that neuroscience has fully answered. They sit at the edge of what science and philosophy can currently reach. But perhaps the more important question is not about ownership at all. Perhaps it is about relationship. You have been in a conversation with this voice your entire life. You have agreed with it, been hurt by it, been encouraged by it, and been misled by it. And most of the time, you never once stopped to ask who was speaking. There is a voice in your head right now. It just said something. The question worth sitting with is not what it said, it is whether you know who said it.